Okay, so again, for anyone that joined us in about the last minute or so, my name is Eric Pradham. I'm the head of digital strategy at Big Wide Sky. I just saw something in the chat about a black screen. Hopefully, you all can see my screen. If not, if you encounter any issues or anything like that, please do let me know. And as well, for anyone that didn't hear it, if you have questions as we go along, please do use the Q&A feature. Assuming that we have time and all of that, I am happy to answer as many questions as we might have. Or we can always follow up afterwards. I will be sending the study, which is separate from the slides that you all will see here. The study is much more in depth. There's a lot of narrative and all of that. I will be sending the study after this webinar, and we're not sending that out through some automated system or anything like that. I will send the study myself directly to all of the attendees here. So those will start to go out, those emails will start to go out today and tomorrow. So just in case some of you do not receive the study today, no worries, I will follow up with you. There will also be a recording of this. If any of you all find value in that or want to share it, then I'll make sure to get that to you. And if this webinar shakes loose any ideas, one of my colleagues who really focuses on planning strategic foresight for the future and helping to plot a course through uncertain times, Jeremy Nulick, he'll be leading a webinar called A Courageous Course Through Uncertainty on July 18th at 11 a.m. Central Time in the US. I may talk more about that if we have time, but if any of this causes you to think differently about your work, your communications, how you present yourself to the world, then I definitely suggest that you join that webinar or watch the recording or whatever else, and I will have details about that in the follow-up email. So I see at least one question already in Q&A. So I'll hit on that as we get going into the beginning of describing the study. So first and foremost, for anyone that is not aware, I've been working in the nonprofit space since about the beginning of 2010. I've been working in marketing since early 2003. So I've spent a good portion of my time in fundraising, development, communications, all of that. I've worked with, I estimate, about 2,000 or so nonprofits, from the biggest that are around down to the smallest, local grassroots sort of organizations. And you'll get a sense of even some of like the budgets when we talk about the organizations that were included in this study. Primarily my work has been in digital, from storytelling to conversion rate optimization to email to advertising and all of that. There was a question about what does Big Wide Sky do, and are we an agency for nonprofits? That was in Q&A. So I'll give you the 30-second version of Big Wide Sky, and then I'm happy to follow up on that. So Big Wide Sky is a consultancy that specializes in helping organizations that are struggling with change. So we do lots of things, from aligning the stakeholders within an organization around a vision of the future, to rebranding, to culture change within an organization. We do product, service, offering, development, and then of course there are communications components to that. I am more than happy to talk more about that. So please, if you have questions, let me know in Q&A. If we have time, I'll deal with that, or we can follow up. So I'm going to get going through the study here. So let's talk first about some of the background and the methodology. So we picked at random 100 organizations. We attempted 100 online donations. These were all first-time donations, and they were not big donations by any means. You know, in certain cases, they were as small as they can get. So we're not going to get flagged. Generally, there were different people, different credit cards, all of that. Some of them were under my name, some were under other people's names. But generally, you know, what we're doing here is not going to get flagged for some sort of like major donor cultivation, or even if you have controls around who you ask to consider legacy giving or recurring giving, we more than likely would not get flagged for that. So, you know, we do talk about recurring giving and legacy giving in the study, and I'll hit on it, those things fairly briefly here during this time. But, you know, keep in mind, of course, that if you have some sort of controls around those things, then we may not have encountered them. As you can see here, as long as email was offered, we opted into your email programs. We followed as many organizations as we could across the social channels. And what we focused on here was Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We could look at Instagram. We could look at any number of other channels. That's what we elected to look at, though. And thankfully, we had some help from some friends, which I will reference towards the end of this. And then when there was texting, calling, or other mobile offerings, then we opted into those. To give you an idea of the size, pardon me, in terms of revenue, and we could have looked at operational budget or whatever, in purple there towards the top, you know, we have 4 organizations whose budgets were small enough that we couldn't find, or revenue was small enough that we couldn't find how much revenue they have. We had 2 organizations then that were less than $1 million. We had 48 organizations who were then from $1 million in annual revenue to $10 million. We had another 25 that were from 10 million up to 100 million. 17 organizations from 100 million up to $1 billion. And then we had 4 organizations who have annual revenue over $1 billion. Just to give you, again, an idea of the size of organizations that we're looking at. We also categorized the organizations by 8 different verticals. So while you can use different categorizations, you know, we wanted to try to group the organizations together in such a way that we could make sense of them. So some of these are fairly straightforward, of course, but in humanitarian, for example, we included in the big humanitarian bucket organizations that do disaster relief, poverty relief, could be your local shelter, but then that would be distinct, for example, from an organization that focuses solely on feeding. You know, basically we wanted to group them together to hopefully get a fairly representative sample of nonprofits within the United States, and also so that we could, as long as we had enough data, we could look at if there were any, if there was statistical validity or any differences by vertical. In total, what we ended up including in the analysis beyond the websites themselves and the donation experience was 405 emails, 38 direct mail pieces. We only received 1 phone call. We did receive 1 text message, but it was after the time that we closed the study, and the study, the data collection was open for just about 90 days. And then there were hundreds of social media updates, of course. To summarize the experience, it does not appear that most nonprofits take the time to experience their communications from the donor's perspective. And I'm going to explain how we arrived at that conclusion. But I think there's actually some really simple fixes, and some organizations, of course, do. You know, they run into less issues than others. Other things that we experienced is multi-channel communications were fairly limited. So to give you an example of that, of all of the donations that we were able to make, all but one organization sent us an email receipt, but then only half of the organizations sent us any email after the receipt. Then, if we go to another channel, only about a third of organizations sent us direct mail. Very few organizations really heavily promoted getting involved with them in social media. You know, for the most part, just about every organization had little Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever icons on their website, but almost no organization really had a heavy push for us as a first-time donor to go beyond just visiting their website, giving the money, receiving an email receipt, and then that was about it. So that was one of the main things that we experienced. I mentioned recurring giving. So we only encountered recurring giving 4% of the time, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, we 2 organizations asked us for a recurring gift before we had finished donating, so in the middle of the process, and 2 organizations sent us direct mail about recurring giving. Only 1% of organizations promoted legacy giving. Now, again, just to reiterate, if your organization has controls around how you or to whom you show recurring giving asks or legacy giving, then of course it's a lot less likely that we would encounter this, being first-time donors and not being, you know, a big-time donors. But nonetheless, I'll talk a little bit about what we saw there. And then there's some really simple and common mistakes occurring that I hope you will see as an opportunity, you know, something that's easy actually for you to check and doesn't have to be something that's expensive or super time consuming. Or, sorry, any one of these issues do not have to be expensive or time consuming to fix. So before I jump into what we experienced, again, if you have questions or about anything that we go through or anything like that, please do use the Q&A feature in Zoom, or you know, you could even use chat if you like. And again, we will send out the study via email, which is different from the slides that you're seeing. It's much more in depth. We'll begin sending that out today, but I'll be sending those out personally, so some of you may receive them tomorrow. So first things first, put yourself in the position of a first-time donor. You have a colleague who tells you about this organization that you probably would like, or is doing great work in your community, or is doing work related to your faith or something like that. So what do? You go to Google, or maybe even you know their URL, you type it in, and you land on their website. So walking through the experience, one of the first things that we experienced is, and Compassion, for what it's worth, was not part of the study. Anybody that's part of the study, I anonymized things as much as we could, but it was not unusual for us to land on a website and then have an auto-playing video like this. And you may look at an auto-playing video like this and say, well, it looks modern, it's attractive, it's bright, all that. And Compassion actually does a really good job, in my opinion, of integrating this auto-playing video. However, you can look this up if you want. I would recommend that if you do look up anything around this, you look into, there's a guy named Phil Nottingham, who's really a great video and search engine optimization strategist. He's worked for some reputable agencies. He's written things about this. One of the things that he says is, when you have an auto-playing video on any page, but specifically the homepage, it makes the call to action when I visit the website to watch the video. It's not to click on that upper right donate button. It's not to search for a child to sponsor. It's, I landed here, something started, so now I'm supposed to watch the video. Now, a lot of people, whether they watch it or not, then that actually becomes an issue, because I may be here because a colleague, a friend, a family member told me about you, or heard about you on the radio, and I'm looking to validate whatever it is that I heard. And if you want to drive me to the donation, perhaps there should be something that is very clear. I don't have to think about it. You can just draw me straight into the story. Now, Compassion does a very good job of this because they have great creative and all that. But what I would recommend is if you are redesigning your website, you could probably save some budget if you did not integrate an auto-playing video right into your homepage. Or if you have an auto-playing video, perhaps you should test whether or not you're getting the outcomes that you want, whether it's donating, whether it's signing up for email. If you're a media ministry, maybe it's getting someone to subscribe to perhaps your podcast, or check out listing times if you're on TV, or any number of other things. If you're an event organization, so you have a walk or something like that, I would recommend that what you drive people to it relates to your goals, and not that you have the flashiest creative or anything like that. I see some other questions in the chat related to the makeup of these organizations, so I'll get past this video, and then I'll answer some of those questions. So even when we didn't encounter an auto-playing video, which again, I would not recommend an auto-playing video, let someone opt into playing the video, or play it in a place that makes more sense, in my opinion, like a story landing page or in social media or whatever. Even when we didn't encounter this, one of the most common things for us to encounter was a donation Lightbox. Now again, we're first-time donors. So in most of the cases, this was the first time that we had visited any of these websites. And this organization that I'll show is not part of the study, but we land on your website. I don't even know who you are necessarily, or maybe all that I know is what a colleague told me. I land on your website and you immediately ask me to give. It's a bit like, imagine the door-to-door salesman knocks on the door, or I walk through the door at a store and someone immediately walks right up to me and says, "Do you want to buy this thing? I just got here. I don't know, what am I doubling my gift for today?" In this example, I've worked with organizations in the past where when we did have messages like light boxes or pop-ups or whatever that we wanted to show, we would program them so that they would show when we thought was most likely for someone to want to give a gift. So generally, we wouldn't show a light box when every visitor visits the website. We would show a pop-up or a light box like this only when someone has visited the website before, or when we know they're a donor, or if we felt that based on Google Analytics or something like that, someone has visited more than the average number of pages. So let's say someone has visited 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages, or they've been on the website for a long time. That's when we would assume, for the time being, pending testing, we would assume that if someone has, read a story, we don't know if they're a donor yet because we don't have that tracking in place, or they've clicked through 3 pages. At that point, we feel like they've spent enough time to be educated enough or to know enough that now we can ask them for a gift. But generally, except in times where there was an extreme need, a funding shortfall, or in times when we know that there are just a lot of donors coming to the website, like the last 2 days of the year, for example, generally I would recommend not showing a light box. And in particular, because in this example, if I go just a little bit further and close the light box, doesn't matter whether you like this design, you don't like this design of this website. Most nonprofits that you encounter, they have a big donate button in the upper right, and often the call to action right in the middle is about donating. Now, again, if you're a media ministry or something else, your calls to action may be slightly different. But the thing is, like, if you did a walk, how do I know necessarily, or how do you know from the nonprofit side, how do you know that I am primed to respond to your call to action? Perhaps if you're going to show me a light box or anything like that, perhaps it should be a call to action to draw me further into the story and do the sales pitch on it. But if you're just asking to go straight to the sale of sign up for the walk or donate now, you may actually turn me off because I'm just not ready to be asked yet. Now, I referenced that we had some questions related to the makeup of the study, so I will stop here. One question was about where the nonprofits were located, so local affiliates or national. It was a mix. So there are a handful of organizations that I can think of that were included in this, where there's, you know, a local chapter or affiliate or whatever in one state, there's another one in another state, and they may have, let's just say this organization has 300 chapters, but they all act independently. Well, then there were 2 or 3 that randomly got included. But then there were also national and you know, organizations that do international work as well. So there were organizations included in this that raise funds in the United States, but their work happens in, you know, Sierra Leone or something of that nature, but all U.S. based. And then there was another question about the average age of each organization. I don't know that at the moment. It's not included in the study. If I get the opportunity, I will include it. I don't have that at the moment. If you have other questions or anything as we're going along, though, please do submit them to Q&A or enter them in the chat. So again, we landed on your website. Often, for a lot of these organizations, our first experience was that we encountered either a Lightbox that went straight to, you know, rounding the bases or closing the sale or whatever. When we're first-time donors, we probably are not primed to give. And if we are primed to give, we're probably not primed to give a bigger gift. And I would recommend that what you take away from that is that you could actually warm people up and get them ready. You can warm people up, more people up, to convert at a much higher rate if you use a little bit of logic around, well, do we know that they visited a website? Do we not? If you use WordPress, for example, there are plugins that would control, if the person has been here before, flip on the Lightbox. If the person is not, don't. You can do the same thing in Google Tag Manager. There are lots of services, and something like that does not have to cost money. Similarly, with an auto-playing homepage video, I would recommend against using one of those. Next thing, let's just say that I click on your donation page. So I click on that upper right donate button or the donate link right in the homepage here for a lot of organizations. Out of 100 organizations, 5 organizations that were included here linked to donation pages that did not exist. This was one of them. So a lot of organizations would either send us off to PayPal, or they had PayPal forms embedded in their website. And then some organizations, of course, were using Luminate or Classy or any number of other things. 5 of the 100 organizations, when we clicked on that donate button, whether we landed on PayPal or stayed on the website, the donation page did not exist. Another 3 of the organizations, though, we actually went through the donation process, click submit, it said thank you for your gift or whatever the message was, but our credit cards were never charged. So out of all of the organizations that we looked at, 8% of the organizations had some major problem just around the donation page, like even getting to it or submitting the gift. And what I would recommend is, and this is one of the reasons that I believe that a lot of nonprofits probably aren't just like doing some simple things like, you know, you launch an email, go and take a look from the donor's perspective. You post something to social media, you update your website, go and click through it. I think that if you were one of the organizations who had a broken donation page or donation page that was not processing gifts, all you'd need to do is go to your website, put yourself in the position of the donor, and you know, click around, read a story, click to the donation page, donate whatever the minimum is. If your minimum is $5, once a week, once a month, donate $5. If that's what it costs you, if it costs you $5 and 30 minutes of your time once a month to find out that something doesn't work, just imagine how much money it could save you, and how many other actions that, from registering for your podcast or signing up for email or whatever else, if you were the first person to find it, as opposed to 1, 10, 100, or 1,000 people who visit your website and something's broken, but they never tell you about it. In the case where we did encounter pages, donation pages that worked, This looks like a donation page. It's not a donation page. This is actually a confirm your details page. Generally, sorry, let me step back. There was a study from an organization called Venture Harbor that found that every 2 additional forms or 2 additional clicks that you introduce to a field, or to every 2 additional fields, or 2 additional clicks that you introduce to your forms, reduce your conversion rate by 16%. So if I have filled out all of the information on your donation page, and my information is correct, and then you load a page that says anything about confirming my details or showing me my contact information or anything like that, not only does the additional click reduce the likelihood that I will convert, but also I may just look at something, if it was to say, for example, which some of these are, a lot of organizations do, says confirm details. I may think that that's my receipt page. And so I'm much more likely to just click away without ever having finished the gift. And there's actually a simple way to test this. Whether you're using Google Analytics or any number of other things, you could use Hotjar to do screen recordings. You could, there are lots of services, but all you have to do is check how many people, for example, land on your donation page, how many people land on your confirm details page, and how many people land on your thank you page. There are more complicated ways that I would recommend going through this, but even in the simplest scenario with very little time or expense, you could check to see how many people get to the confirm details page, but never actually get to the thank you page. And I would recommend, if all of the information is correct, just process the gift. Don't bother about confirming somebody's details. Now, you may be in a scenario where your technology requires this. I understand not all of these technology choices can be changed overnight, but perhaps, if this isn't a discussion that you've had within your nonprofit already, perhaps you could go through the experience, do a screen recording or 2 screenshots or whatever, and just show it to the stakeholders or the powers that be, and see if perhaps that's enough to get the conversation going. So let's just say, though, moving on, that we get past the confirm details page. You can see here we're donating $23, so not a big gift by any means, but I go to click submit payment here, and what do I get? Oh, I get a pop-up, or this is called reCAPTCHA, that says select all squares with street signs. I'm sure you all have encountered this before. I referenced that study from Venture Harbor about additional clicks and additional fields. Every 2 additional fields on a form reduces your conversion rate 16%, which is similar to what I've seen in testing in the past. So you can imagine what happens when I get this and it says select all squares with street signs. It's not a street sign, so okay, I click on the squares with the flag, I guess, and I click verify, and no, select all images with coffee. Okay, so I'm on my second round now. I see 3, I guess, with coffee, so I select those. No, okay, let's do this again. Select all squares with street signs. I encountered this, or we encountered this at one point for one organization. We saw reCAPTCHA 6 times in a row. Now, I've already referenced the amount of clicks and whatnot, but also you can imagine if you're an organization with an older donor base, you may not have a lot of donors going online, but you're going to have some, certainly. Now, I realize that's a bit of a stereotype and all of that, but for the sake of illustration here, you may not have a lot of folks going online, but in particular, people who are not used to this are much more likely to get frustrated. They're much more likely to run into problems and just click away. And in particular, what this communicates to people is there's some sort of friction in the process, or there's something going on, and you must care less about their donation than you care about whatever's going on with you. Now, I work in the space, so of course I know that often these are put in place because you have a lot of fraudulent credit card charges going through. or you have people that are testing your donation form from somewhere overseas, looking for the opportunity to hack you or whatever else. I get it. But I recommend you talk to your vendor or your IT team or whatever else. There are much simpler ways to implement this. There are things called no CAPTCHA, new CAPTCHA, there are IP honeypots. But I recommend you reduce the number of clicks, and also that if possible, you implement your security in such a way where you will make it super simple for the donor to give, and just don't throw up any more roadblocks. There's a question about an average abandonment rate on a transaction page. So I am not aware of any industry stats at the moment. I'm sure that there are. However, I've seen wide ranges before. So I can remember one gospel rescue mission that I worked with maybe 6 years ago or so. They had one of the lower abandonment rates that I had ever experienced. They were about 10%. So by the time they got someone to the donation page, 90% of people would complete giving a gift. I can think of other organizations that I've worked with before where the abandonment rate was much more like 90%. Now, what you're going to run into there will have to do with a lot of different things. What's driving people there and all that, but also what's the experience on the page. So if you have a transactional page that's really focused on storytelling content, like a video playing or blog post like things or stories of lives changed, then you may have people ending up on the page that are much more interested in that than they are in converting. But there are so many different factors playing in that I would need to go and look up further data if there's anything industry-wide at the moment. The next thing that we encountered was we fill out all of our information and we click submit, and then we get errors about required information. So there are lots of donation systems where the required fields are called out, they're red, or there's an asterisk or something like that. We encountered a lot actually where the required information was not told to us in advance or shown to us, but rather, like in this case, we filled it out, we hit submit, and then we got an error or this notification that says, please select an option. Now, I don't think you really need to know if I'm Mr., Mrs., or whatever else, but if you really need to know that, I would recall what I said about additional form fields and additional clicks, but also just think about, what are you asking people to fill out? Is it really important? Because, perhaps you have an opportunity in certain cases to collect as little information as possible and then fill it in later through a donor survey or through any number of other things. Because if I'm a first-time donor, perhaps you should reduce the barriers to entry as much as reasonably possible. Get me to give the gift and then fill in the gaps later on. Now, there were certain cases that were really frustrating that we encountered where there were required fields and we would hit submit and get an error, but your donation system would not tell us where the problem was. So, I realize, again, technology is difficult to change, but if you were to just go through the process periodically, put yourself in the position of a first-time donor, a recurring donor, whatever, reactivated donor, somebody who's signing up for email, anything like that, and say, does this feel natural? Like, is this a piece of information that we actually need? Is this natural? Or are we loading a page with an error and perhaps losing people when we could just let them slide right through, and maybe we don't need to know if Eric Kratom is a Mr. or a Mrs. or a whatever it is. There were two cases where we filled out the donation form and we encountered a recurring gift ask. A recurring gift ask that's separate from a checkbox that says or drop down field about one-time gift or recurring gift. There were two cases where we clicked submit, and before the donation processed, we got a pop-up or a Lightbox or some other message that asked us if we wanted to switch to recurring giving, which I think is awesome. I do think that we should be asking more for recurring gifts, However, perhaps you should process the gift first and then ask the donor if they want to commit to giving a recurring gift. Now, there may be cases in your organization where you're asking only certain people to give a recurring gift, as I referenced earlier. That's totally fine. So we would not have encountered that in your case. Really what I'm focused on here is if I've clicked submit, I may very likely think I'm done. Just like the confirm details page, I may think that I have already given my gift and click away. And so the abandonment rate when a Lightbox loads prior to or a recurring gift loads prior to the person actually giving the gift or to it processing, the abandonment rate here may be much, much higher than it is if you just process my gift and then ask me afterwards. We did also have 2 organizations that asked us for recurring gifts via fairly standard, bounce back in a direct mail piece. I think that's great. I do think we should be asking for more recurring gifts, in particular because of the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, M&R, and Giving USA. All of these organizations and studies have shown significant changes in retention rates and whatnot, which I haven't really referenced here today, and we can talk about if you're interested. But as generally we're seeing retention rates decline and organizations are having to rely on fewer, bigger gifts, I fully believe that recurring giving and legacy giving are a big opportunity that most organizations just aren't really taking advantage of. So again, we've gone through your home page to the donation page and all that. Now we've finally given a gift. One of the next big opportunity areas is the thank you page. Now, if this is your thank you page, if you have to send people off to PayPal because of what you can afford technology-wise or whatever else, I totally get that. I understand that you can't change everything. And technology, often there are limitations budget-wise, staff-wise, whatever else. So I get it. If you can't change the fact that you send people off to PayPal and then this is what PayPal's donation page looks like, you've donated X to Y, I get it. But there are a lot of organizations where your thank you page could be used to draw people further into the story. So you could ask for the recurring gift on the thank you page. You could say, let us show you how your donation is impacting children, dogs, whatever it is that you work on. And you can do this whether you're getting people to donate, register for, or sign up for a podcast or any number of other things, despite the fact that I'm focused here on donations. But to have me come to your website as a first-time donor, and it may be worse as a repeat donor, but as a first-time donor, at the very least, I come to your website, I've given you money, I feel good. This is a point where I feel like I've done something good in the world. I've given money, whether it's $5 or whether it's $500, something that I hopefully care about. That's one of the best times to ask me to take another step. Now, in your case, taking another step might not be a donation. Perhaps it's sign up for email, advocate for us, promote, I don't know, Amazon Smile or something of that nature. But to just say thank you as if like we're done here isn't going to draw me into the story and help me to stay committed to your organization. I see one question that I'll deal with right after this. This is another example of what we experienced on the thank you page. Thank you. Your donation has been processed. Now, save your information with Quick Donate. You won't have to enter it more than once for or any other organization participating in Quick Donate. Okay. As a donor, I didn't encounter this when I was on your donation page. I don't know what Quick Donate is. I've worked in the space. I don't know what Quick Donate is, but let's set that aside. If I even read all of this, is that the call to action that you want to put in front of me? You may get more people at some point to donate in the future because you've made donating easier. But I would argue that because I should feel good, because there's sort of an afterglow from donating, that there should be something that you can do to help keep that going. Like, Eric, you've made your first gift. How about starting, I don't know, peer-to-peer fundraising, becoming a recurring donor, or any number of other things? My guess is, if we were to test this, that the call to action being to save my information with Quick Donate is probably not helping to get a second gift or any other activity from me. We had a question about, is a donor more likely to give a recurring gift in the moment or in a subsequent request? I think that that's a great question. So more than likely, if your organization has a logic around who you ask for to give a recurring gift, that's probably based in some pretty good numbers, or at least some good rationale, right? Like, if I'm a first-time donor and maybe I only donated $30, we might reason that I'm not the most likely to give a monthly $10, $20, whatever it is, gift. And perhaps we don't want to do what some people will call a FASK, a thank you and an ask, at the same time. Perhaps we want to use the thank you page to draw people in to the story and help show them how they're having an impact through you, how they're having an impact on their own, or something of that nature. If we step further back, though, before the gift has even processed, really, I think you need to test it. But what I would recommend is that you ask for a recurring gift when you think the person is most likely to give a recurring gift. And without any numbers, pardon me, without any numbers on your organization, I would say, if we can identify that someone has given at least one gift before, or they're giving a gift of sufficient size. So maybe it's $100, maybe it's $500, whatever it is. In those cases, existing donor, active donor perhaps, or larger donor, maybe a mid-sized major donor, then I would trigger a recurring gift ask. Otherwise, without testing it, I would say it's probably best to just go for the first-time gift and then say, here's how you can have a bigger impact. And you can do that in your follow-up emails. You can do that during a subsequent website visit, or any number of other places. Okay, so we've given our gift. We found that of all of the organizations where we had a successful donation, all but one organization at least sent us a receipt email. Fairly standard receipt, very minimal thank you copy. You know what they look like. You've donated X amount of dollars on Y date. Perhaps there's a fund or something of that nature that it went to. So again, all but one organization at least sent us a receipt, and all of them came on the same day, which is awesome because if some of you are familiar with Tom Ahern has said that in his research, a donor that receives a personalized thank you within 48 hours is 4 times more likely to give a second gift. Unfortunately, what we encountered was most of the organizations, 65 of them, only sent one receipt with, again, very minimal thank you copy that I would argue is probably not very personalized. 25 organizations sent at least 2 receipt, thanks, or welcome emails. So in most cases, that was a receipt, and then it was some sort of thank you. Sometimes it was all text, from the executive director. Sometimes it was something that was really promoting a story, or here's how you're having an impact in the world, or something of that nature. We had one organization sent 4 receipt, thanks, or welcome emails, and we had one organization sent 5. So you can imagine that all of those, they become very similar once you get past the thank you and sometimes a welcome. But again, if we call back to the Tom Ahern quote, if you can get a personalized thank you out within 48 hours and increase the likelihood that someone's going to give a second gift by 4 times, then it's probably worthwhile within your donation platform or your email system or whatever it is to automatically trigger a receipt and then a welcome, even if it's an all text thing, or to set up a regular process where you get your information out of, let's say, PayPal, and you load it into MailChimp or whatever it is. and you use that to get out your thank yous in the hopes of getting people to repeat, increase their LTV, getting them to advocate, and so on. So there was a question about how many donor touch points before an org should cease and desist. I like that question because it's so hard to answer. In my experience, most of the time this is based on time and time since the last gift, and not based on the number. In direct mail, of course, it's there tends to be a more straightforward ROI calculation, right? How much does it cost to cultivate a donor? And then what's the likelihood based on modeling or other characteristics or time frame before they lapse? So, within, it becomes in direct mail, often, you'll have, if somebody that goes past 12 months, sometimes 24, depending on your organization, then they're considered lapsed and you're going to treat them differently. But within digital, my experience has been that most organizations will continue to just email you until you unsubscribe, or until there's some sort of other issue like a spam complaint or whatever. And then when we get into social media, then it's very different because the volume of touch points can really be huge. I would recommend that at the very least you stick to time-based. And so, once somebody has gotten, like a sort of a normal RFM model, once somebody has gotten far enough out from giving a donation that we need to start treating them differently. And at Big Wide Sky, we have a model that we use around marketing automation and who's in different segments, and we automatically move people around and all of that. If your technology allows it, or if we can move you into a technology that we use. But then from there, if you're going to go into a system that's based around touch points, and even if you're using a system like RFM or whatever, and you say 0 to 12 gets treated one way, 13 to 24 gets treated another way, most definitely you should be testing that. And whether it's us or other organizations, there are big data organizations that I really respect, that can help you figure out if you're putting the your funds to the best use. After the thank yous and the receipts and all of that, 43 organizations sent no email. So basically half of the organizations where we had a successful donation, basically half of them sent no email. 12 organizations averaged less than 1 email per month. 13 organizations were between 1 and 2, so like 1.5 emails per month. 12 organizations sent 2 to 5, and then 10 organizations averaged more than 5. Now, we had some correlations that I'll reference later, but basically when we did a correlation, the amount of email that you send per month is highly correlated with the amount of revenue that your organization has. Now, do you have high revenue because you send a lot of email? Do you have high revenue because you send a lot of direct mail? Do you have do you send a lot of email because you have high revenue, or which direction do these things go, right? I can't answer that at the very least, but there was a very clear correlation between the organizations that sent more email do tend to have more revenue. They may have more staff. It could be any number of things. However, it was a very different experience, which in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk much about today. However, in the study, we talk a little bit about what you should be using email for. And in my opinion, the purpose of your email should get someone, is to sort of start a conversation. Get the person, though, from the email to your website where you can control the experience and you can start sort of the sales process or the cultivation process. But a lot of organizations are sending their email and they're asking for the gift immediately, which again, I think is a bit of a turnoff. When we looked at direct mail, now we're online donors, so some organizations aren't going to send us direct mail because they're going to have logic behind that. However, we had 4 organizations send us direct mail within 1 week. One organization sent their first direct mail piece 3 days after the donation. We had 5 organizations take 7 weeks, and another 5 take 8 weeks to get us the direct mail. Now, we can talk however we want about multi-channel donors and whether or not somebody who's online should be getting direct mail. However, what I would argue is, at the very least, if I'm an online donor, online first-time donor, if you're going to send me direct mail, which I think you should because of the physical nature of it and multi-channel communications and whatnot, if you are, though, going to send me direct mail, I'm probably going to respond better to it if you send it to me early, as opposed to sending me the direct mail piece 2 months out, in which case I think it would be reasonable for us to assume that at the very least I'm going to look at your direct mail piece as not being super relevant to me because I'm 2 months out from having donated. And I may even have a negative perception of it if we want to apply stereotypes on top of millennials or Gen Z or whatever like that, more online donors. So I see one question in the Q&A, which I will get to here in just a minute. But when we look at direct mail, one of the most distinct direct mail pieces had some personalization in it, or not personalization, let's say, but a nice touch, let's say. So it was a child-focused nonprofit. I opened the receipt. It's fairly standard, thank you letter sort of stuff. But then inserted into it was this piece of yellow paper with a drawing on it. You can tell it's a child-focused charity. Dear donor, you're really cool to give us so many wonderful books. So you can tell it's a book, education, more or less focused nonprofit. I love to read and I like to share my books with my friends. Thank you for being so generous. Yours truly, Jonathan. Now, not every organization can scale up something like this, right? There was a picture of children with their books in this one. That's not scalable for most organizations. But even, you talk to some donor strategists and they'll tell you, you should just have a thank you Post-it note. I've worked with some organizations where they process their thank yous in their office, and they have people who've gone through their programs, for example, or volunteers who process receipts, and all they do is they write on a Post-it thank you, or if it's a ministry, God bless you, or whatever it happens to be, they slap it on the receipt, it gets closed up, and out the door it goes. It's not every organization can do that because you may be printing your receipts somewhere else, but at the very least, I hope that you would agree with me that receiving something like this makes it much more likely that I feel the impact of the change that I am making in the world. There's a question about, do you mean make more money from sending more email or have a bigger budget to send more email? So if I understand you correctly, and if I don't answer this correctly, please do follow up with me. So the correlation, I think, is what you're referring to. The correlation that we found is organizations that simply send more email have higher revenue. And we found other correlations to social media as well. We don't have the specific numbers on email, if that's what you're asking about. But if that's not related to it, please do let me know. Okay, so driving towards the finish here. Thanks to our friends at ActionSprout, which is an awesome social media tool. Every nonprofit, for the most part, out there should be using it. It's great for engagement and all of that. But thanks to our friends at ActionSprout, we were able to get some really interesting information. Gathering data in social media can be very difficult because I might be able to see how many likes you have. I might be able to see how many people comment on your posts, but I can't see from the outside how many people click on your links. How much revenue do you generate from social and things like that? So it can be very difficult to gather data, but thanks to ActionSprout, we were able to see that 60% of nonprofits post less than once per day, 11% post less than once per week, 61% of nonprofits engage less than 100 people per post, and this is specific to the organizations we were looking at, to be clear. 18% engage less than 10 people per post, and then getting into the correlations, we found high correlations between the amount that you post and the number of people engaged. So you post more, you tend to engage more people. That also highly correlated with the average numbers of emails sent per month and your revenue. So all of these things, if post frequency is high, it's likely that you have high revenue, post frequency on Facebook. If the number of people that you engage per post in social media is high, it's likely that your organization has high revenue. Correlation, causation, we can talk all about that. However, Um, I think it is worth noting that in general, organizations that post more and engage more people also appear to have high revenue. They could have more staff. It could be because they've been there for longer. It could be any number of things. But found that interesting at the very least. Facebook said recently that the average Facebook user scrolls through 300 feet of newsfeed per day. So imagine your screen, it's what, 4 inches tall, give or take? You're doing this 900 times. We found following, so multiple of us followed all of these organizations, found that the large majority of posts from pages get placed at the bottom of the newsfeed. So basically, once you've scrolled through all of your friends or whatever, all the individual posts, you get to a section where it's predominantly posts from pages and the experience changes completely. And if you've ever done this, if you go and follow plenty of organizations, you'll see that it becomes much less engaging because you go from individuals, a more social aspect, to organizations and brands and whatnot. And so I won't go through the whole thing here, but just as an example, in the example to the left here, just looking through this one, after most of the individual updates have been scrolled through, 23 of the 26 posts that are seen here were from pages. And if we stop and look at any of them, we can see that the vast majority have little to no engagement. There are a few stellar ones here and there, but in general, the experience changes. And this is one reason, in my opinion, why a lot of organizations are seeing less engagement and less organic visibility within Facebook in particular. And one reason why you probably need to advertise on Facebook if you really want to be seen. We also looked at LinkedIn, and so we have got some scrolling going on here, but hopefully if it's not too fast, you can see that there's a much better mix of posts from companies, as Facebook calls them, and than individuals. But we found in our review on LinkedIn that the average person has 84 reactions, 12 comments, and 9,500 video views. Now, LinkedIn is about 1/10 the size of Facebook. So it's a much smaller audience, which also means that there are certain influencers that skew the numbers. You have people like Gary Vaynerchuk, who, for example, can get 50,000, 100,000 views on a video. So there's a bit of skewing that goes on here. But when we compare to a page or to a company or a nonprofit company, as LinkedIn calls it, on average, an organic post from a page in our review gets 377% more reactions, but less comments and significantly less video views than an individual. And when you're advertising, we found as well on LinkedIn that organizations advertising have almost 4 times as many reactions, but less comments. And then in our review, we do video advertising for the nonprofits that we work with. So we have data around that, but in our review of the organizations we were looking at, we never actually found video ads. Nonetheless, what I would take away from this, I hope, is that on LinkedIn, though it's a much smaller audience, you have a much better chance of being seen, and you have a much better chance of getting reactions, even if you don't get people to comment or watch a video or whatever else. Now, the last channel that we'll look at is Twitter. You can say whatever you want about Twitter. We have some scrolling going on here. The average person on Twitter, in our review, it's 164 replies, 3 retweets, 26 likes, and almost 360,000 video views. Again, Twitter is a much smaller audience, like LinkedIn, than Facebook. So you have skewing that goes on. You have personalities like, you have President Trump, you have Elon Musk, or whoever these people are. So you have skewing that goes on, and I think Twitter is much better suited to personalities, which is talked a little bit about in the study. In our review, on average, organizations receive 0 replies, 0 retweets, and almost no likes on Twitter. And then if you're advertising, most of these things increase. So we found that if you're advertising as compared to an individual, you get more replies. You get over 10 times more retweets than an individual, and you get a lot more likes. But we did not encounter any significant amount of video views from advertisements. So we're running right up at the end of our time, but keep key takeaways I would say is Lightbox's auto-playing videos and immediate asks might not be the best use of your homepage. And again, if anyone's out of time, I will reiterate, I will send the study beginning today. Some of you will get it tomorrow. So if you folks have to drop off, no worries. The Lightbox's auto-playing videos and immediate asks might not be the best use of your homepage. I would definitely make sure that your donation pages exist and function. It's not that difficult to go to your website, click on the donation page, donate $5 a month, and just make sure it works so you don't have to find out from a donor 3 weeks after something broke. Remove the friction from your donation process. Please get rid of reCAPTCHA. Don't require fields that you don't really need. If something is required, tell people in advance. If you can remove the confirm details page, please do so. Ask for recurring gifts when you think it's appropriate, but don't interrupt the donation process. Let somebody process their gift, make sure you get the donation, and then when you feel it's appropriate, whether it's on the thank you page, in an email, in a direct mail piece, or whatever else, then ask people for the recurring gift. Use thank you pages to draw the donor in further. So, whether you want to ask for another gift or something else is up to what you feel is appropriate and what you test, but the thank you page may be a place to ask someone to advocate for you, to register for text messaging, to register for Amazon Smile, or any number of other things. But draw the donor further in. Don't just say thank you and we're done. Personalized thank yous matter in all channels. You can see the experience that I encountered, but also I referenced Tom Ahern. So as much as you reasonably can, show the donor, whether it's from your executive director, from your head of development, from children out in the field, or whatever it is, even if it's just a Post-it note that says, thank you, draw people further in as much as you can with a personalized thank you. And then examine your use of social media. So I referenced with Facebook how there were high correlations with post frequency, basically, and the amount of engagement to revenue. Might not be causation and all that, but what I believe is that you can get a lot more out of social media if you make a significant investment and if you don't approach it like everyone else. But then even look at each channel differently. You can get better visibility on LinkedIn, though you might not get a lot of engagement. On Twitter, it's probably better suited to personalities like your CEO, your executive director, somebody who has a really engaging personality. We can talk about Instagram or TikTok or Reddit or whatever you want. But just examine what you're doing, what you're getting, and if it's not working in particular, maybe it's not working because there's something else you could do. So I will send the study out beginning today. Some of you will receive it tomorrow. If you have other questions that we didn't have time for, you're looking for more details, if you're curious about Big Wide Sky, I am happy to stick around. I can stick around for another 10 minutes. And if you don't have any questions, no worries. We'll begin sending this out. We have our next webinar coming up, which is focused on strategic foresight and plotting a courageous course through uncertainty on July 18th at 11 a.m. Central. And in the meantime, if I can help with anything, if you want to think differently about any of this or think differently about the future, please do let me know and contact me. Thank you.